Welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. In this episode, Tidbits are back. I'll also be answering questions you guys had for me about the behind-the-scenes process of how I make YouTube videos. There are chapter links for each section if you want to just skip around. Tap or mouse over the video playback area of your screen to find them. And let's get started. I have two articles in this year's INTERWEAVE Knits Gifts 2022, which is out now. One is an encore presentation of an article I did, I think, a couple of years ago about different ways to work the hat crown decreases. The other article is new, and it is about how to customize sock toes for a better fit. The magazine is available in a hard copy or digital, and I will leave links to the INTERWEAVE online store down in the show notes. This tidbit came to me from Preslava. It's a website called Weezeum, which means We Museum. The way they describe their project is as follows. For each Weezeum, we ask people from a community two questions. What makes you happy and what makes you sad? They respond to each question with an object and tell the story behind it. The Weezeum is the collection of these objects. For our newest editions of Weezeum, we collaborated with 45 people from the three groups in Bulgaria that most often face hate speech: Roma, LGBTI+, and refugees/asylum seekers. So in the collection from refugees, Rina, a 2013 refugee from Syria, the thing that makes her sad is a crocheted vest that she made with yarn she took with her when her family left Syria. She was so sad that she used crocheting as a way to deal with her grief, but she hasn't been able to wear the vest. It stays with her as a reminder of their family's difficult journey. So knitting through grief was something I talked about here on a Casual Friday back in June after the death of my mother. I really needed to knit, but I was in the middle of knitting this sweater right here and didn't want to continue knitting it because I was afraid that my grief would be sort of forever associated with this sweater and that I wouldn't want to wear it. And I was loving the results I was getting knitting this sweater. So instead, I decided to knit a baby sweater for my college roommate's first grandchild, who is going to be born in September. I wanted to use my knitting to celebrate a new life and then send that piece of knitting kind of off into the world where I wouldn't see it again, but I knew that it would be loved by somebody else. So in that video, I asked you guys how you knitted through grief because everyone is different, and I felt that hearing all the different ways that people found to combine the grieving process with their knitting could be really valuable to other people who were struggling and maybe weren't sure how to combine those two things. And you guys really came through in the comments of that video. So if anyone out there is going through the grieving process right now and is trying to find a way to knit through it, I would recommend reading the stories people shared in the comments of that video. I'll leave a link both up here at the top, but also down in the show notes. So back to this Weezeum exhibit. It covers all sorts of objects, and many of them are textiles, even if they aren't hand knit or crochets. And it's really interesting to see some of them are like ethnic costumes, things like that. I'll leave a link to the Weezeum down in the show notes. And again, the crocheted vest is in the exhibit of items from refugees. The rest of today's tidbits all have to do with Scotland. I think a few of these must have come into my periphery just because Shetland Wool Week was from September 23rd to October 1st. But some of it was just serendipity. So the first of these has to do with the University of Glasgow, which has been featured in a number of tidbits in Casual Friday over the past few years because of their Fleece to Fashion program. So they've had various online programs and conferences and ways for the public to participate in volunteer projects that help them with their research. So this week, the University of Glasgow launched its Stories from Glasgow podcast. And the topic for this very first podcast was the Fleece to Fashion project, with several professors as guests talking about their area of research in this podcast. I found it fascinating to listen to. They covered a number of different topics, and this is how it's described on the podcast webpage. Our first episode takes us on a deep dive into the Scottish knitting industry with the University of Glasgow's Fleece to Fashion project team. Which iconic knitted garment found fame in Hollywood? Where in Scotland can you spin alpaca yarn? Who is really behind the knitting patterns of Burnout Klein? You don't need to be a knitter to enjoy this episode, but you may be inspired to pick up some needles and cast on as the team takes us on a journey across Scotland that spans decades. So one of the many things that they talked about in this podcast was how undervalued the skill set was of women doing hand knitting and finishing work versus men doing machine knitting. Hand knitting was thought of as an unskilled job, which I think we can all agree is a bogus statement. Knitting frames, which are like the early knitting machines, took more muscle to operate, so those jobs were reserved for men who were, of course, paid more. Women who were hand knitting coats and dresses and shawls, all sorts of things, were paid less than people making socks on a sock knitting machine. So even now that machines are fully automated, there's a division of who is doing what on the factory floors. Men are still in charge of what are now fully automated computerized knitting machines and washing machines, while women are still doing the skilled finishing work. Now, at this stage in our timeline, the factories recognize that anyone can do any of these jobs, but there does seem to be some sort of self-selection involved in the jobs that people apply for based on these sort of long-held gender norms. So this first episode coincided with the launch of a pattern book from Fleece to Fashion based on the architecture of the University of Glasgow. So there were all sorts of projects in their book, from tea cozies and to sweaters, hats, shawls, all kinds of things, each of which took inspiration from an architectural feature of the university. The designers include some of these professors, former students, but also there are some well-known designers such as Carrie Westerman. So I'll leave links down below. This tidbit came to me from Ollie Jones, who often sends me really great links for tidbits. In the past, I have shared links to videos that portrayed the walking song. One of those videos was from a scene in the TV show Outlander. But the link that Ollie sent me today was a video of a group of present-day people who were singing the walking song. So walking is the word for fulling, which is the post-weaving process that wool goes through. The walking song is a way to sort of rhythmically keep everyone in time as the fabric is beaten against the table surface. And I imagine there is also to break up the monotony of something that would otherwise be a pretty tedious activity. This tidbit is from Kettle and Collies, who shared it in my Ravelry group. There will be what looks like a really interesting exhibition about vintage knitting from the 1920s to the 1990s in Edinburgh this month. The description is as follows: explore over 150 stunning knitted items from two of Europe's largest private vintage collectors, Mark and Cleo Butterfield. Celia will give you an overview of the development of knitwear design from the 1920s to the 1990s, with deeper insights into some of the garments featured in the exhibition. The tour will examine how evolving knitting techniques were accompanied by the rise of concepts such as modernism, pop art, punk, and deconstruction, leading to a wide range of innovative knitwear designs. You can see this exhibition as an online presentation, or you can see it in person on the 14th of October. If you want to see the online presentation, that costs £5, and I believe that the in-person exhibition is £12.50. But I will leave links to both of the ways to get reservations for this event down in the show notes. This tidbit came to me in a fairly circuitous route. I read Reddit once in a while, and based on what I read, Reddit will send an email with links to things I might be interested in. One of the subreddits I regularly visit is called Craft Snark. So the links I get in those Reddit emails are often discussion threads from Craft Snark. In this email, there was just the title of a particular thread that said, "This one weird trick to gain fame as a knitter." So naturally, I clicked on the link and I came to the Reddit post, which was a screen capture of a Twitter post from an account called The Depths of Wiki. And it had just the first sentence of an entry about a woman named Betty Mouat. I presume that that's what The Depths of Wiki is about, just the first line of random Wikipedia articles. What the text said was that Elizabeth Mouat, 1825 to the 6th of February 1918, of Shetland, was a spinner and hand knitter who gained fame at the age of 59 when she found herself alone in a boat and drifted across the North Sea to Norway. Now, the Twitter caption said, "The passive language here is so funny to me. Oops, just found myself on a boat drifting to Norway." I had so many questions. Making har snarky comments about a single sentence is all fine and dandy, but this person was significant enough to have a Wikipedia entry about her, so I wanted to know more. I fell down a rabbit hole about this. I read the Wikipedia article. Intriguing. I started Googling. I found a website that had more detail, just had more questions. And finally, I found another web page that had even more detail. Essentially, Betty, first of all, had had a very hard life. She was an unmarried woman, had survived all kinds of accidents and whatever her entire life. And this is the biggest catastrophe of her life that she then survived. She lived in the really southern part of the Shetland mainland, and she wanted to go to Lerk. And it was 24 miles away, and the local people often would just walk that far. But she had suffered an injury when she was a child, and that would have been very difficult. So she was going to take a boat. The seas were really rough. The skipper warned her that it was going to be really rough. And she said, no, I want to go. She wanted to go visit her sister. She wanted to see a doctor because she'd had a stroke the month before and she was worried about her health. She had money with her to buy things up in the town for her neighbors. And finally, she had 40 hand-knit Shetland shawls that she and her neighbors had knit that she was bringing to sell in Lerk. And she got on that boat. She expected to be a little seasick. And so she didn't bring much to eat. She brought a couple of biscuits and a jug of milk. And that was it. Because she just, and the seas really were rough. This was end of January. And the skipper warned her and she, nope, I want to go. And it was rough and she was feeling nauseated. So she went down into the cabin that was below decks. Things were really rough and she was having to hang on. And she heard a lot of yelling, a lot of commotion, and then eventually it was quiet, but she had no idea what was going on. And eventually she was able to kind of look above decks, and she realized she was alone. And later it would be discovered that what happened was the mainsail had broken and it swung around. It knocked the skipper and one of the crew members overboard. The crew member was able to get himself back up, and then both of the crew members attempted to rescue the skipper by launching a smaller boat. And they rowed out to where the skipper was, but he ended up drowning. They couldn't save him, and then they realized there were still some sails on the Columbine, the boat that Betty was on, and it was moving at too fast a pace for them to be able to catch up. They got back to shore, set up the alarm that we needed to do a rescue. Again, Betty knows nothing about this. She just knows that she's alone on this ship. And it's very rough seas. She spent the next 9 days hanging onto the ropes in that cabin so that she wouldn't fall over. And the only thing she had to eat were those biscuits and milk, and she made them last. She couldn't, there was more food in the boat, but she couldn't get out of the cabin because the ladder that hooked up the main deck to down in the cabin had fallen over in all of the rough seas, and she was too heavy for her to lift up. And so she didn't lie down. She didn't, you know, for 9 days, she was just hanging on. And eventually the ship ends up getting to Norway and kind of crashes on the rocks. And then she's rescued by some people in a fisherman's village. And they take her in and they're nursing her back to health. They can't communicate with her, and so they find an Englishman who lives in a town a few miles away who comes and figures out what happens. Eventually, they get her, you know, back to the UK. Her story is news all over the place. She's met with crowds, and she rides her first train ride of her life when she gets back to the UK and in Hull, and she gets on a train, and people are cheering her. They created the equivalent of a GoFundMe for her. It was a subscription list to give her money, including Queen Victoria sent her £20. And eventually she makes her way back home, and she never left her craft again. She died 32 years later at the age of 93 on the anniversary of the night when her ship crashed into the shores of Norway. So it was an amazing thing, and I'll leave all kinds of links down below so you can read all the different articles that I had found. But I wanted to know what happened to the shawls, the 40 hand-knit shawls that she was carrying that she was going to sell, because I thought, oh my gosh, what a tragedy. Did that just go down with the ship? Did they not recover them? You know, like what happened? Finally, I realized that the news of her adventure had apparently hit newspapers around the world. That's why there were all these crowds visiting, you know, cheering on her when she made her way back home. So I looked in on newspapers.com, the digitized newspaper database, to see if I could find an article about her. And there were articles all over the place, but there was a really huge one in the Aberdeen newspaper. And so I'm scanning through them. I know this, I know this, I know this, I know this. Finally, towards the end of the article, there was a paragraph that at least gave me a hint about what happened to those shawls. Several of the Shetland warehousemen in Edinburgh have already been on the alert to secure the parcel of shawls which Miss Mouat was in charge of. Shawls with such a history should fetch a long price. So at least there was intent to recover them. I'm a little irksome that the monetary value is perceived to have come from surviving the shipwreck and not from the hundreds of hours of labor represented in those shawls. But, you know, so what I would love to know is if they actually did recover those shawls, what happened to them? If the shawl that Betty was wearing, what happened to it? Because apparently it was on display later that year at this Edinburgh exhibition in the Shetland booth or whatever exhibit. It was publicly shown at some point, but I don't know what happened to the shawl after that. I'd love to know. But again, if you guys are interested in learning more about Betty and her amazing adventure, I'll leave all kinds of links down below. So I had a bunch of questions about what my process is for recording videos, and I had a whole outline. I had kind of things scripted out. I did a lot of recording. I sat down and I went, oh my God, that was wrong. And I just jotted down a bunch of notes, and we're going to go through them. And I think we're going to get through this a lot quicker than the amount of time I spent this afternoon. So one of the questions was about how I divide my time between my job, which is making videos, and my passion for knitting, which is a separate thing. I don't actually think of them as being that separate. What is separate is the process of recording and editing is separate from everything else I'm doing with regard to my knitting. I think of myself as a knitting communicator. So I am a rabid information seeker. I really have, it isn't just that I like to learn, I have a drive to learn. Like, it drives me, and it's like a dopamine hit. And when I have a question and I get an answer, and that leads to another question, another and another, and I just can keep gathering more and more information, it's like, it's super exciting. And I really love sharing information. I mean, that's what communication is, like receiving information and transmitting it. So for me, it's ideal to be able to communicate what I've learned or what I know about knitting with other people. And I just, have to use the process of these videos and the equipment and the software and all of that kind of thing. I learned what I needed to learn in order to make that happen. So another question I had was about the planning, like what does it look like to plan a video or a series of videos? In some cases, might not have my idea for a video until a few days before a Technique Tuesday video goes out. That's not as true anymore. I am much more comfortable if I kind of know a couple of videos ahead of time so that can be kind of going in my head. And right now I'm doing a series on sweater styles, and so there's 5 styles and there's 5 videos, but in between each of those I'm doing a video on modifications. So I'm less certain sometimes about what that in-between video is going to be. I have some ideas, and then I kind of see what the comments have been that I've been getting about the videos that are about the actual sweater styles, like a drop shoulder, modified drop, to kind of inform me about what would be good for those in-between videos. So that was a very different thing. I've got these 5 sweater styles. I'm kind of thinking about what's going to be true for each one of those. And once I've made one of those, kind of look at what did I talk about in that one, and that kind of helps me figure out what to say in the current one, and it creates a pattern, but it's not completely planned out ahead of time by any means. But for sort of a one-off technique video, I usually kind of know what's going to come up, and as soon as one Technique Tuesday video has been published, I start thinking about the next one. What kinds of knitting might need to be done for this video? What sorts of swatches? How am I going to knit those? Do I need charts? Do I need drawings? What kind of demonstration am I going to do? Am I just going to be describing a concept, or am I actually going to demonstrate something? Do I need finished samples to show? So I'm thinking about all of those things, like what in general is going to happen. And then I start thinking about the specific sections that might be going on in the video. And sometimes I'm writing out my ideas, like if I was actually telling this to someone right now, what would I say? And I look at the order of things, and because I tend to look at knitting within a technique within the context of overall knitting and not just as a separate, isolated thing, I think about what additional information would be useful. And I have to try really hard not to put too much use, like this is interesting and this is interesting, because it can become too much. And so I have to really work at containing things. I talk it out in the shower, at my desk, in the car. I'm always listening to how I'm explaining this, because every technique video is the first time I am teaching this technique. It's all things I use that I understand, but I use them and understand them in the context of my projects. So when I come to a technique video, I have to think about, how do other people use this technique, or what sorts of projects might they use them in, and how might that situation be different from how I do it? So I have to put myself in those people's shoes in order to figure out how to explain it. I feel like something's burning in here. So I have to think through, what are the sequential steps that I need to present to a knitter who might be at the beginning end of the spectrum or more expert. So I have to think about all the possibilities of who might be watching this, and making sure that I'm not overwhelming people with information and not underwhelming people with information as well. When it comes to actually recording, so I've been thinking through this, talking it through, sometimes writing things out. I script some things, and then other things are not scripted. So face to the camera, intro and outro for a technique video, absolutely scripted, so that I can be short, concise, to the point. This is what's in this video. I will also script tidbits nowadays. I didn't always do that, but it's much easier because there's so much work involved in bringing in images and links and all of that stuff. And it's information that I don't know. That this is something I just found out about and I'm sharing with you. So it's much more helpful to me if I can script that out and just read it off of a teleprompter rather than trying to go from notes and trying to remember what I remember about this particular video or article that I read. Anything that's done overhead, that's going to be like a demonstration or pointing things out, that's just me talking. Sometimes I will have little bullet points to make sure that I'm not forgetting something, particularly if I find that I'm stumbling through the explanation, then I might sit down and write it through and think it through a little more and then go back and record again. If I have like a sweater or something on a dress form and I'm talking through what it's about, that's just me talking about that. But again, I have been talking this out and kind of rehearsing it in a lot of different ways just so I can hear myself talk and think about what is relevant and what might not be relevant. The big thing for me is really to figure out what my point is, whether it's a technique video or something I want to say in a casual Friday about a project or something. Is if I know what my point is, then it makes it much easier. But sometimes I think I'm talking about this and I find myself going off in this direction, and trying to get control of that can be a challenge. So I was asked some questions about how long does it take me to make a video. And since this is spread out over time, it was kind of hard for me to figure out. On a day where a Technique Tuesday is being published, I am recording it and editing it on that day. Although lately I've been trying to do the overhead recordings maybe the day ahead and get a rough edit in and then do the rest of it on Tuesday. And then prior to that, I've been spending a week or so knitting things or thinking about things or talking it out loud. But Tuesday, I'm doing Technique Tuesday. And if I get done early, great. I have more time to knit or do whatever. But I plan on that's Tuesday. So probably a total of 16 hours for a Technique Tuesday video. Casual Fridays, I usually have a file open about things I think I might want to talk about or projects I've been working on. What are the topics I'm going to talk about? And I get a sense of, do I have enough or maybe not enough? Like, you know, I might adjust the number of tidbits I have in order to fill out a certain amount of time. And so again, that's all day Friday, but then, you know, leading up to that, I've been thinking about what segments I'm going to be working on. I had a few questions about the video equipment that I use. I'm going to use my iPhone to kind of go around and show you what I have, and then I will put everything down in the description. So let me just put this on. So I have a checklist of things I'm going to talk about. All of this recording that I did earlier today, I'm scrapping this, and I went back and I jotted some things down. This is what I'm working with right now. From my point of view, I can see this monitor, so I can see if I am in view. If I look up here, there is the camera that I'm recording on, and the little platform with the black cloth below it is where I can put my teleprompter. It's like a see-through piece of glass that's slightly tinted but acts reflective, and so I can use an iPad as a teleprompter if I need it. This is my audio recording equipment. It's a RODECaster Pro, and then this is the receiver for my lavaliere mark. I have the transmitter is there. I have several lights. I have this one right here and this one right here, which light up my table. I have fleece covering this table so that if I'm demonstrating, I don't get any scratchy, tappy sounds. So the camera's on a tripod, and then I have this other stand right here where if I'm doing overhead stuff, the camera is mounted here and pointed down. I can't see through that camera, obviously, and then in the monitor, it would be upside down. So this monitor, when I have it like, oops, this looks like upside down right now, but if the camera was overhead, this would all be right side up. So I can just flip the monitor around that way. That's my equipment. I'll put all of the list of all of the equipment down in the video description. So then I had questions about the editing and post-production process. When I'm recording, I have the camera recording the video. the camera has a microphone, so it's recording sound too. I just don't use that sound. And then over here on my microphone equipment, I have another card that has got the audio. So when I'm done recording, I go over to my computer and I move the audio and video files to an external hard drive, and then I upload those files into my video editing software. It's called Final Cut Pro. And then I synchronize the audio file with my video file, and then I eliminate the camera audio file out. So then I have in one new file, and I give it the name of whatever that segment is. And then I place it in the position of the video where I want it. And then I can go through and edit it. Usually when I have those files, I'm keeping track of when I'm recording which ones are the good takes and which ones are the bad takes, so that I'm only bringing in the good takes into my video editing or editing software. And I look at the total amount of raw video, and I can usually figure out how long the actual finished video is going to be. I usually eliminate about a third, sometimes a half, but usually about a third of whatever's been recorded for Casual Friday. And it's not like I'm cutting out the good stuff. I'm cutting out the dead space before, at the end, the me stuttering and stumbling, wandering off into some direction that is irrelevant, or I realize halfway through a sentence I'm not saying it right and I start over again. So I'm cutting out a lot of that stuff. In a technique video, I for sure lose about half of it because I'm really working hard at making sure everything is needed in the technique video. I'm not just, talking about something for the sake of talking about it. So the amount of time it takes to edit something is usually 2 to 3 times, well, probably about 3 times as long as whatever the raw footage is. Because if I was just to watch the raw footage all the way through, if it was 45 minutes long, it's going to take me 45 minutes to watch it. And so to edit it, it's probably going to take me a couple of hours, because I'm not only watching it, I'm cutting the parts out, and then do I want that? I'm re-listening to it. Does that make sense? Is that smooth? Is the transition right? Do I need to go get an image and put that in? Do I need to put titles in the bottom? So that takes a long time. Once the editing process is done, then you export the video to what's called an MP4 file. So it's external to the software. So it's like if you were making a PDF file out of a Word document. It's the same thing. You're creating this external file. And then I go into YouTube Studio, which is my creator space on the YouTube platform, where it's where I have all my channel information, all my videos and the comments and the analytics and everything. I upload that video to YouTube. That takes a little bit of time. And while it's uploading and then it has to process, while it's doing all that, then I can create my title, my description, I can upload my thumbnail, or I can make my thumbnail if I haven't made it yet. I can put all the timestamps in so that the chapter links will show up when you watch the video. I put in links to other videos that I might talk about, when I say, oh, I'll leave a link up here and down in the description. I have to put, I have to put those in and with the right timestamps. And then I have to put at the end screen, the last 20 seconds of the video, there are 2 like playlists or videos that you can click on to watch more things, more of my content if you wanted. And then I have to do all of the stuff like the monetization, and it's part of the whole processing thing that YouTube does. Is it's scanning the file for music and copyrighted information, scanning for checks to make sure that you can really monetize this video, or fully monetize it if you're using music, which I don't use. So once I publish it, then I also need to send links, embedded links to Twitter and Facebook, and create a discussion thread in my Ravelry group that embeds the video so people will know about it there. And then I spend the next 30 minutes to an hour monitoring the comments, because the spam bots will come in as soon as something is published, and either porn links or money-making links, that kind of crap that I need to mark and report so that they don't stay there. Somebody asked about the algorithm, and they appreciated that I make the content I want to make, and I'm not, a slave to the algorithm. I'm not trying to please the algorithm, and how do I balance that? And the answer is I do not try to balance that. I do not worry about the algorithm. I choose the things that I want to make. I assume that some people, or I hope that some people, are going to like what I choose to make. The most important thing is that I come up with a title that's meaningful and and a thumbnail that is helpful. Most of my technique videos are watched by people who are not subscribers. They get to my video because they are searching for a video because they need help. And so I need, for those videos, a title that's going to show up in a search. For my Casual Friday videos, most of those are just going to be my subscribers, and it kind of doesn't matter what it is, they're going to watch it. But other people are going to be picky and choosy, and they're going to use that title and the thumbnail to kind of decide, inform them if they're going to watch it this week. But occasionally, I will get people who are not subscribers who might be interested in one of my Casual Friday videos, and if I have a sense of that, then I try to make sure that I create a title and thumbnail that's going to appeal to them. But they are hard to make. I am not good at that. It's something I struggle with quite a lot. Algorithm is a misnomer. Algorithm is a series of finite instructions like an actual computer program. And what YouTube is doing is using machine learning, artificial intelligence, to figure out what you want to watch. What are you watching now? What have you watched before? What have other people who watch this video watched that you might like to watch? How can we keep you on YouTube as long as possible so that we can serve you ads and make more revenue from you? So that is their goal, is to keep you on YouTube, and the machine is learning what you like and what other people like, and what are the things. They're looking at all the patterns that humans can look at, but they're just doing it faster and over a wider range of people. So YouTube, the actual people are wanting to kind of instruct the machine that's learning kind of what the goal is maybe, and then the machine is figuring out how to make that happen. So they're collecting a lot of data that YouTube may not even really know what it means or what to do with it. They're just collecting that data. Every video, not only do they know what the title and the description and the tags are, whatever, they can read every frame visually and know if there's spaces in it or if there's movement. They can tell when people are leaving or if their retention is a lot longer because they want your attention. They use speech recognition to listen to what I'm saying in my video, and they automatically create a transcript, a text transcript of that is used to create closed captions, a benefit to viewers, but it allows them to know what all is actually being said, and they can use that to help recommend videos as well. And those closed captions can be automatically translated into other languages. So there's all these benefits that they are supplying to the viewers, but it's obviously a benefit to them as well, ultimately in order to make money. Somebody asked about Burnout, that, you know, like I've reduced my Technique Tuesday videos to every other week, or sometimes I've chosen to reduce the length of my Casual Friday videos, and how do I recognize when that's happening so that I can make changes. And I'm 60 years old. This is not my first creative rodeo. So I've had burnout before. I've had creative block before. I've been stuck in ruts before that I haven't gotten out of in a long time. And so I'm watching out for that. I'm protecting my knitting life. I don't want what happened in my other areas of my creative life to happen with this. So I protect it. So I can recognize the signs of what's happening. I don't always know what the solution is. And so sometimes I'm like, well, I wonder if I just cut back on this much, or if I change this, what will happen? How will I feel when I do that? And that's what I've done. So after, 4 years of doing Technique Tuesday videos every single week, that just can't sustain that, because I need time to think through my ideas. So I really love having that week off, and then it makes me excited for the next Technique Tuesday video. So I'm very happy having done that kind of thing. I also realized I don't need to tell you every single thing that I'm doing in my knitting life in order to make a longer video, because then it just takes longer to edit and longer to process and longer to do that. I would rather pick and choose what it is I'm going to share instead, and be able to be happier about how I'm spending my time doing that. Finally, I had a question about what do I see as the biggest difference between my oldest videos and the videos that I'm doing now. And I think that, there's two comparisons I can make. One is between the videos I did between 2009 and 2015, and then the earliest videos I did when I started in 2017 to do weekly videos. 2009 era, the technology was just so different. The resolution of cameras, the upload speeds, the file size that YouTube will allow, all of that stuff was much lower than what we have today. And I hadn't figured out the overhead recording at the time. I couldn't figure out how to do that. And that was the thing that really frustrated me and that I wanted to solve before I started making videos in 2017. The difference between 2017 and now is probably more that, 2017 was the huge learning curve. And so my husband was really good at like the audio stuff and incrementally making that better. He really was helpful with the overhead lighting early on. I was never happy with the face-to-camera lighting. It took a couple of years to resolve that. I, learned basic editing, and then when I get comfortable with that, what is this other thing I could improve? I didn't try to make everything perfect every time. I try to get to 80% of what I am capable of at a given time, and then over time, that 80% is much better than it was a couple of years ago. The biggest difference for me in terms of being able to create videos more efficiently is that I moved my studio into this room. So the studio can be permanently set up. The lights are always here. The camera stands are always here. And I can just move over here and do something if I need to. Where before it was in separate rooms, I had to carry equipment up and down in the basement, set up lights, take them down. So it was very frustrating. So when I get really frustrated with something, then I make a change. You guys would have to tell me what you see as the biggest difference from your perspective. Okay, so I think that is it. I got through all the questions, and this was a great example of me preparing and scripting and trying to figure it out, spending a long time recording and then sitting down at my computer and going, this is ridiculous, here's what I need to talk about, and sitting down and being able to do it in going all the way through. But that is in large part because I did do all the scripting, I talked it out, I was stumbling, I realized things were not working the way I wanted, and so then I kind of started over, but I'd had all of this rehearsal ahead of time to make that a lot easier. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any suggestions or questions, you can leave those down in the comments below. And just a heads up that I'll be doing some traveling soon, so sometime in the next few weeks, I will be skipping one episode of Casual Friday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.